the other top line from the announcement today, and Miller, you have mentioned his name, the latest dispatch from the war of Jofra's elbow. Archer suffered a recurrence of the stress fracture that afflicted him first in 2020. He's been ruled out for the summer, although interestingly Rob Key, the managing director of England Men, suggested that they were hoping he might still be in contention for the World Cup in India later this year. Firstly, Vish, should Archer have gone to the IPL?
You know what? I don't think it matters, really. I think if you look at the plan that the ECB had for him, which they articulated back in November on that Lions tour in the UAE, Rob Key spoke about a roadmap that they had where Archer was going to, Archer trained with the Lions. He then played that game against England, then went away. He was going to pick up with the SA20, where he played for MI Cape Town, and then from there move into the ODI tour against South Africa, into the ODI tour against Bangladesh, and then go to the IPL to basically have a bit of a tune-up before the summer. And to be honest, it was absolutely fine. It seemed to be working really well. And then they just realised, during the IPL, whether it was before or after he ended up going for that elective procedure in Belgium to clear out his elbow, that he'd suffered a recurrence. And I think there was an interesting line in that Rob Key press conference about when he was asked if maybe Archer needs to look beyond Test cricket now, or just stop looking at Test cricket, I suppose. And Key pointedly said, well, all cricket's been a problem so far. If he was, I suppose the IPL thing comes down to, would Archer be hurt if he wasn't playing cricket? No, Archer wouldn't be hurt if he wasn't playing cricket. But at some point, he was going to have to.
That is his job.
Yeah, and it probably wouldn't have been with Sussex. And I suppose that's the sadness with all this. It doesn't feel like there's any real way out of it. And I thought it was also interesting that Key pointed to the fact that the ECB are going to look at what they've done. Have they made a mistake along the way, or rather, what is it about the way they brought him back that could have been different? And I think that's quite healthy. But at the same time, it doesn't bring back a summer for Jofra Archer, does it? I mean, the fact that he said that he's not ruled out of the World Cup is purely because of the uncertainty. There's no sense that Archer could be fine by August or maybe the start of September. It's just because you don't know, and that's really the sad thing. And that's the thing that I think you heart bleeds for Archer in that regard, because this isn't a person who's feeling pain and not playing because of it. This is a guy who's feeling pain and gets a scan that tells him he's got another stress fracture in his elbow. And it feels like there's no end point to this up until maybe he decides to call it quits, whether that's from a format, whether that's in the game outright. And I'm not saying that Archer is in a position where he has to think about walking away from the game altogether, but it's not the kind of thing that does go away. It is the kind of thing that needs constant management. I think the thing I will say is this idea that Archer would go off and take a year-long contract with the franchise is actually quite stupid, really, when you think about it. Because why would Mumbai Indians, for example, take that risk away from England? Why would they assume that themselves, given that everything so far has been done, specifically from the ECB's point of view, everything has been done with Jofra's best interests at heart, and yet we're still here. And I don't know that they could have done anything differently. I don't know if there was anything. He's been doing all the rehab. He's been doing all the training, evidently, because he performed well when he came back for England at the start of this year. Sometimes things like this happen, and they are unexplainable, and ultimately just really, really sad.
Yeah. One thing I would say, though, I do believe, genuinely, I think it's a redundant question to ask, should he have gone to the IPL? I mean, it's equivalent of asking a cricketer, should he breathe? You have a lifespan as a cricketer. Your lifespan as a fast bowler is probably going to, unless you're James Anderson, it's going to peter out just soon after you turn 30. It's going to start dipping away. Archer's not there yet, and there is money being thrown at players like Archer who, I don't blame him for wanting to cash in. I don't blame Ben Stokes for going to CSK and doing nothing. I don't blame Joe Root for going to Rajasthan Royals and doing nothing. These guys are being paid to be present at the biggest franchise tournament in the world because they are huge names, and that in itself is the answer to the question: should he have gone? It's like, and would Mumbai be willing to take the risk? I mean, in your quick rundown there of what Archer's been doing to build his way back into format, there's a little clue as to what's going on here when you mentioned MI Cape Town. It's like MI Cape Town. He is Mumbai Indians Cape Town. Archer is increasingly a Mumbai Indians brand ambassador, for want of a better word, and therefore, of course, they'd want to have him on board as something that he's their story as much as he's England's story these days. And frankly, it's been 2 years since he played for England in any great sense of the word. So increasingly, he is an IPL franchise brand ambassador fundamentally. So it's a really difficult balance to strike. But I don't think there's any point in sort of quibbling about players thinking, you know what, people want to throw me money for being present at an event, and I'm not actually. Sometimes, I'm not going to be doing an awful lot while I'm there, but they're happy to pay me. It strikes me as a really reductive question to say, should you have done that? And it's like, well, if you want to pay me to go and sit and do nothing for a bit, I'd be delighted. Thank you very much. So it's all part of the broader shift in dynamics in the world cricket. And again, I come back to what started the show with. There I was down at Chelmsford for an international game where basically nobody in the world paid any attention at all, apart from the locals who turned up to watch Bangladesh. There wasn't even a TV deal. It was essentially a lastminute.com deal to screen an international game, albeit Bangladesh Ireland, but they're still top 15 ranked sides in the world that are competing there. The international game has reached a tipping point that you cannot blame players for looking around and thinking, you know what, there's something going on over there that is actually where things are happening. I wouldn't mind having a piece of that. You can't blame them for saying I want to get on board, because if they delay it and say, oh, well, maybe I'll just hold my elbow's a bit hurty, I'll defer that contract till next year. Then next year doesn't come because your elbow's still hurty, and then next year doesn't come, and suddenly you've missed out on however many £1,000 of payment, £1 million of payment that you could have got by being present. So it's not a sensible question in my opinion.
I retract it. Given the history that we've just been walking back and forth around, you could say if the ECB had kept Archer sort of in cotton wool through April and May, and then put him into a first-class game in order to prepare for the Ashes, be in exactly the same position, because his elbow would have gone twang then as well. Just on, Vish, you sort of touched on his England future and kind of picking and choosing between formats. We had on Stump Mike, I'm going to call him a colleague, Ian Bishop, whose words I think we all pay attention to when he speaks. He's sort of counselled Archer to forget about red ball cricket. He's obviously not going to be thinking about it for a while in any shape or form. Key was more optimistic in his when he spoke and made a comparison with Pat Cummins, who had serious injuries much earlier in his career, I think it's fair to say. But what is the likelihood that Jofra Archer doesn't play another Test again, do you think?
I suppose highly likely, but I wouldn't say he's spent the last few years concentrating on red ball cricket, on Test cricket specifically. I think the only red ball game he's played in the last few years has been certainly since the start of the 2021 summer. I think it was a second team game for Sussex, something like that.
It was,
right?
I was
What
down
was
there.
that game in the UAE, the warm-up game? Was that?
Oh, there was. That was. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
There was also that as well. So he played one day and bowled 10 overs. Fair. But yeah, I wouldn't say that he's. It's not like his workload to be, in training to get him to a level where he can play Test cricket or what's done is. It is just playing cricket. So whatever the issues are, then they need to find them. But in terms of if he plays a Test again, you know what? Maybe he does in 2 years' time. You just don't know. I suppose the idea behind the Pat Cummins thing is the fact that he had these serious stress fractures of his back at a young age, and then fast forward a few years later when he'd only played a handful of first-class games, he was like, right, back and ready for Test cricket, and he's played it ever since. But Yeah, maybe. But then I suppose, as Miller said, there were fewer distractions back then when Pat Cummins was going through that period. He didn't really have to entertain the idea of, might go to KKR and, live it up there and go to their other franchise competitions around the world. So I suppose it'll be a different decision for him to make. It might be made easier going forward, given this injury, what the ECB do with regards to central contracts. Now, Archer has had a central contract all the way through these injuries, and they're obviously talking about revamping them, multi-year deals and this, that and the other, and I suppose there'll be some dexterity into the kind of deal that you would give someone who is injured, who hasn't played for you, much over the last few years. So it'd be interesting to see how that works. Certainly the central contract he's on now is not of the same value as, say, the central contract that Jimmy Anderson is on, which I think is an important distinction to make. But yeah, it depends how that looks and whether he takes that and it allows him to still do all the other things. You'd imagine after what's happened in the last month or so, even though the ECB have had control over Archer, I think they would want a little bit more control with whatever deal they do give him, if they do give him a deal at the end of this summer.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content plus live streaming, make sure to subscribe to ESPN Player.